One of the most important contributions to the history of comic books came in 1936 from publisher Henle Publications, who published a 4-issue comic magazine. We're going to go through in depth and see all the special features that happened in this short-lived series. Wow, What a Magazine had a cover price of 10 cents. It was a 52-page magazine from Henle Publications. The editor was S.M. Eiger, with a color cover, black and white interior, some duotone interiors as well. The magazine size was 9.5 inches by 11.25 inches. Glossy cover, newsprint interior binding, and saddle stitched. There's pedigree copies from the Lost Valley collection of issues 1, 2, and 3. The significance of issue number 1 is the first Will Eisner art in comic books. Fu Manchu, Buck Jones, and Captain Scott Dalton begins. It's the first comic book work of Will Eisner, and the first comic produced by S.M. Jerry Eiger. And it features a Dick Briefer cover. Some of the highlights of issue number 1, including Pee-wee, a one-page story for children from S.M. Eiger. Also a one-page story, Tom Tinker from S.M. Eiger. Dr. Fu Manchu is a one-page story from writer-artist Leo O'Malia, and it's syndicate strip reprints in this case. Serene Summerfield readapted her story into the new Space Limited in a 2-page story. S.M. Eiger also gave us a one-page humor story called Jocko and His Car. Larry and Tessie was a one-page story from Lou Furstadt. Louis Furstadt, born October 7th, 1900, lived until August 1954, a Jewish-American muralist and comic artist. He painted murals at the RCA building and the 8th Street subway station in New York on the occasion of the 1939 World's Fair. He drew comics including Chuck, Mr. Risk, and The Bouncer. Furstadt identified as a communist and regularly contributed comic strips for the Daily Worker newspaper. Issue number 1 of WOW also features Bully Hayes, the Black Pirate, a one-page adventure story from Will Eisner, as well as a one-page story called The Flame from Will Eisner. William Will Eisner, born March 6, 1917, lived until January 3, 2005, an American cartoonist, writer, and entrepreneur, one of the earliest cartoonists to work in the American comic book industry, and his series The Spirit, 1940-52, was noted for its experiments in content and form. In 1978, he popularized the term graphic novel with the publication of his book, A Contract with God. He was an early contributor to formal comic studies with his book Comics and Sequential Art in 1985, and the Eisner Award was named in his honor. In 1936, high school friend and fellow cartoonist Bob Kane, of Batman fame, suggested that the 19-year-old Eisner try selling cartoons to the new comic book Wow, What a Magazine. Comic books at the time were tabloid-sized collections of comic strip reprints in color. By 1935, they had begun to include occasional new comic strip-like material. WOW editor Jerry Eiger bought an Eisner adventure strip called Captain Scott Dalton, an H. Rider Haggard-styled hero who traveled the world after rare artifacts. Eisner subsequently wrote and drew the pirate strip The Flame and the secret agent strip Harry Carey for WOW. WOW lasted 4 issues. After it ended, Eisner and Eiger worked together producing and selling original comics material, one of the first such comic book packagers. Their partnership was an immediate success, and the two soon had a stable of comic creators supplying work to Fox Comics, Fiction House, Quality Comics, for whom Eisner co-created such characters as Dollman and Blackhawk and others. Turning a profit of $1.50 a page, Eisner claimed that he got very rich before he was 22. Later detailing that in Depression-era 1939 alone, he and Eiger had split $25,000 between us, a considerable amount for the time. Wow, What a Magazine number 2 from Henle Publications featured once again Will Eisner and Louis Furstadt art. There was a Popeye article and a painted cover. The Popeye story was one page from E.C. Cigar. Will Eisner gave us a one-page historical adventure story, Scott Dalton, as well as a one-page The Flame story. Captain Scott Dalton was another adventure story running one page for Will Eisner. And there was a fourth title from him. Harry Carey debuted in a one-page detective mystery story. The Adventures of Hiram Hick in New York was a one-page story from new comic book writer Bob Kane. Robert Kahn, known as Bob Kane, was born October 24th, 1915, lived until November 3rd, 1998. An American comic book writer and artist who, with writer Bill Finger, created the DC Comics superhero Batman and also his sidekick Robin. In 1936, freelancing original material to editor Jerry Eiger's comic book Wow, What a Magazine, including his first pencil and ink work on the serial Hiram Hick. The following year, Kane began to work at Eiger's subsequent studio, Eisner and Eiger, which is one of the first comic book packagers that produced comics on demand for publishers entering the new medium. Wow, What a Magazine, number 3 from Henle Publications, featured a Will Eisner cover, his second one in a row. Also featured art from Bob Kane, Dick Briefer, Louis Furstad, and others. There was a Ripley's Believe It or Not article, as well as a Popeye one. Will Eisner contributed a one-page Harry Carey story, as well as a two-page The Flame story. Jack Dempsey gave us a Popeye story with pencils by E.C. Cigar. And there was also a Thimble Theater story from E.C. Cigar featuring Popeye. SM Jerry Eiger gave us a Pee-wee story. And Will Eisner also gave us a one-page Harry Carey story. Bob Kane was back with the second appearance of Adventures of Hiram Hick in a one-page humor story. Jerry Eiger gave us a humorous story called Pee-wee. Will Eisner gave us a three-page adventure story featuring Captain Scott Dalton. And there was a one-page text article, Otto Saglow, along with Little King paper doll cutouts. And Bob Kane gave us a second story, a one-page story called Life in the Roar. Wow, What a Magazine, number 4 from Henle Publications, was the final issue of the series in 1936. It featured a Dick Briefer humor cover. Will Eisner gave us a number of stories, including one page of The Flame, one page of Scott Dalton, and one page of Harry Carey. Bob Kane returned with the third appearance of The Adventures of Hiram Hick in New York in a one-page humor story. S.M. Eiger gave us a one-page humor story, Pee-wee. E.C. Cigar returned with Popeye in a one-page story. And there was a one-page text article about Popeye from writer Jack Dempsey. The Little King was featured in a one-page story from Otto Saglow. And Mandrake the Magician was featured in only this one issue from writer-artist Lee Falk. And the classic Flash Gordon appeared one time only in this series, in issue number 4, in a one-page story written by Don Moore with pencils by Alex Raymond.